Call to order the March 22nd, 2018 Watertown Board of Adjustment. Roll call, please.
Dargis Johnson.
Here.
Megan Olson.
Here.
Stonebarger.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Colhane.
Here.
Kays.
Here.
Ford. Here. Hanson and Stein are absent. We have a quorum.
Okay, I'd like to have a motion for the approval of the February 22nd, 2018 minutes.
So moved.
Ms. Olson, seconded by Mr. Dolly. Any discussion? Additions, corrections? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 2, applicant Carrie McCall, Stony Point, conditional use 17885. Joe?
Carrie McCall, doing business as Stony Point Leather at 794 South Lake Drive. The applicant seeks conditional use approval to operate an in-home business, the production and sale of leather goods from her primary residence located in the R1 Single Family Residential District, per Section 21-14035, Home Occupations, contingent upon compliance with Chapter 2170 Home Occupations and Standards, and specific rules governing individual conditional uses, including but not limited to Section 210202, 2B7A through H. Staff finds that home occupations is a listed conditional use for the R1 Single Family Residential District per 21-14035. The definition of home occupation is any occupation which is clearly secondary to the main use of the premises as a dwelling and does not change the character thereof or have any exterior evidence of such secondary use other than a non-illuminated sign not exceeding 400 square inches in area. This occupation shall be carried on or conducted only by members of a family residing in the dwelling. The applicant submitted the site plan, which reflects or does not reflect the following requirements of the ordinance. Section 210202, 2B7A through H is specific rules governing individual conditional uses, such as ingress, egress, off-street parking, loading, screening, buffering, signage, exterior lighting, required yards and open space, and general compatibility with the area. Regarding Chapter 2170, Home Occupations and Standards, McCall proposes to utilize approximately 252 square feet, or 7% of the 3,996 square foot single-family dwelling, for her leather goods business. She has signed her assurance to comply with Chapter 2170, and no signage is proposed at this time. Regarding Chapter 2163, off-street parking and loading requirements and engineering design standards, sufficient area exists for 5 legal off-street parking spaces. To be counted as a legal off-street parking space, it must meet minimum size and location standards and allow the exit of a vehicle without moving another vehicle. A minimum of 2 off-street parking spaces are required just for the single-family dwelling, and this board may require more as a condition of secondary uses such as home occupations. Regarding Chapter 2165, outside storage and display requirements for specific uses, Section 217002 supersedes 2165 for the secondary use. It states that no outdoor storage of equipment or material used in the home occupation shall be permitted, and that no public display of goods shall be allowed on the premises except inside the principal building. Regarding Chapter 2173, landscape and lighting standards, the minimum number of trees to be located on the development lot or site shall be 1 tree per 50 feet of frontage. There are 0 trees located where 12 to 13 are required to be planted in the boulevard or 25-foot required front yard, as has been the interpretation of the intent of this ordinance in the past. Obviously, there are many trees in the background. This board must determine if satisfactory provision and arrangement has been made concerning Section 210202, 2B7A through H in the chapters and titles described. This parcel lacks minimum required boulevard infrastructure improvements from which the property has never been granted waivers or variances. If generally endorsed, this board may consider conditions of approval such as fulfillment of any or all lacking boulevard requirements or waiver of right to protest same and or any other conditions for secondary use that this board deems necessary.
Has there been any comments from any of the neighbors?
No.
This is a large parcel. Is it been preliminary plan for any future subdivision?
Nothing that we've been made aware of. So
The building that's immediately on the north end, is that part of this same parcel?
Yes.
What is that?
I
That building, just a storage building there. I think they keep some tractors and mowers and stuff like that in there.
think it's storage.
It's Williams.
Is there any sidewalk to the north or the south of this property?
There's already a stupid
Bike
thing.
trail?
A trail that's on the opposite side of the road that is already in there. It crosses at the top of the hill and then comes back to that side. So the rec trails already exist adjacent to the road all the way around.
With that, I'll open the public hearing. If anybody's here to speak for or against this conditional use, please come up and state your name. And
You can just state your name.
I'm Carrie McCall.
so you're going to do on-site weather working?
I am.
So you're not going to be selling it on-site, you're just going to be making it on-site, or are you going to sell it
Correct.
on-site, or you can have,
I'll be selling online, and if there's any shows that we can attend to sell, then we'll do that as well.
okay. So,
Would you object to a condition that if and when the city would ever require boulevard plantings along that stretch of South Lake Drive, that you wouldn't object to doing it at that time?
If I might interject here, Carrie is a renter of this property, and unfortunately, I didn't get a conversation with the owner, so just for your information.
I'll withdraw it.
so seeing as how she's a renter, if we grant a conditional use, can we grandfather it so that if she moves out and no longer rents the place, the conditional use goes away? Just a thought.
How would we?
I'll make a motion to that effect.
Any other questions? In that case, I'll close the public hearing and ask for
One
more.
second, John.
Go ahead.
Just, this might be kind of a silly question, but you're not actually gonna like tan the leather there?
No.
Okay, you're gonna buy leather and then.
Correct.
I mean, they're two separate, different processes. Thanks.
Okay. We'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion in a second for
Mr.
discussion.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the conditional use, subject to the following conditions. Number one, the conditional use for the home occupation is specific to this applicant. Any subsequent conditional uses for a home occupation would have to come back before this board. Two, boulevard trees and plantings are not required of this applicant since they are not the owner of the property, and the home occupation is specific to this applicant. Three, there are no sidewalk requirements to be instituted towards this applicant, as there is already pedestrian walkway on the other side of the road.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Kays and a second by Mr. Culhane. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Or the conditional use passes. Item number 3, Joe. Steve and Beverly Mack.
Applicant owners Steve and Beverly Mack. This is regarding property address 1900 5th Street Southeast. Application was submitted requesting the ability to rebuild an existing non-conforming structure and use, a single-family dwelling located in the C3 Highway Commercial District in the event of casualty pursuant to the terms of Section 21-2803-17 and contingent upon compliance with specific rules governing individual conditional uses, including but not limited to 21-0202 2B7A through H, and the purpose of the C3 zone. The application contradicts the following ordinance regulations 210406 states that buildings destroyed by casualty beyond 60% of value cannot be rebuilt for non-conforming use. 210302 prohibits the construction, remodeling, and occupancy of building structures and lots and uses that conflict with or further conflict with the regulations of the zoning district in which they are located and the height and placement regulations for non-residential districts. Buyer financing issues have compelled the owners' applicants to seek board approval for the ability to use and rebuild this circa 1968 single-family dwelling in the event that it would ever be destroyed by casualty per 210406, which I just went over. Staff finds that a single-family dwelling is neither a listed permitted nor a conditional use in the C3 Highway Commercial District per Chapter 2128. However, pre-existing single-family dwellings may be granted conditional use per 21280317, which may allow for any and all permitted uses in the R1 single-family residential district or R3 multifamily residential district where such use existed prior to the adoption of this conditional use, and where such conditional use, if granted, will be limited to the rebuilding or remodeling of such pre-existing use, and specifically excluding any new construction otherwise permitted in either the R1 or R3 districts. The applicant submitted a site plan and written request which reflects or does not reflect the following requirements of the ordinance. And I would like you to look at your site plans. We didn't go into great detail here. It's a review of section 210202 2B7A through H. Again, our specific rules governing individual conditional uses regarding ingress, egress, off-street parking, loading, screening, buffering, signage, exterior lighting required, yards and open space, and general compatibility with the area. Chapter 2163 is off-street parking and loading requirements. Chapter 2165 is outside storage and display requirements for specific uses, and Chapter 2173, landscape and lighting standards, it may be considered, and also Titles 5, 18, 21, and 24 in regards to sidewalk, trail, curb, gutter, and subdivision. This board must determine if satisfactory provision and arrangement has been made concerning 210202 2B7A through H and the chapters and titles described. The drawback of approval is that granting use variances versus rezoning to a district that fits the use of the property could allow this nonconformity to exist, and if destroyed by casualty, be rebuilt so as to continue to exist into perpetuity amongst existing and future incompatible uses. If generally endorsed, this board may consider conditions of approval such as fulfillment of any and all lacking boulevard requirements, waivers of right to protest, and also any other conditions this board deems necessary. Also, if endorsed, staff requests clarification on what zoning regulations this parcel should follow going forward. For example, C3 or R1. Unless specific conditions are listed via this hearing, permits may be issued to this property for any permitted uses listed in the C3 zone or Chapter 2128.
So this house, along with the other ones, are predated coming into the city, correct?
Correct.
And so when the city brought them in and it was zoned commercial, they were an aberration, right?
I believe so. We started looking into, it wasn't easy to find some of the details here. I believe it was, this area was brought into town in about 1973, and we think it was zoned commercial at that time.
That property was originally part of a township zoning area at the time of the initial issuance of a building permit, or the structure was just built prior to the advent of either the county zoning regulations coming into being in 1974. There was township zoning on the periphery of the community at the time.
And the purpose of this conditional use is so they can sell the property and get a loan?
Correct. The buyers are having trouble with as is typical, getting a loan on a property that's not zoned for single-family dwellings.
And in the past, we have dealt with this by granting conditional uses for people that want to be able to rebuild if it burns down so they can get a loan, et cetera, because they're in the wrong zoning area.
Yes, we've done both the conditional use variance and the rezoning.
And it's commercial on the corner down there where the pawn shop, and so there is commercial area in the area, right?
Yes, this is all of this red area is C3 highway commercial. There's several, this is kind of that little golf course.
But everything north of the blue square is residential, realistically.
No,
Yes.
there's a couple commercial businesses there too.
Oh, there are?
Yeah, they're mixed. There's houses with commercial business behind them. One is
You got the electric service place on the north end.
there's
Yeah.
the pawn shops on the south. There's also a guy that does
You got a
Okay.
repair up
campground.
there, and then the campground.
Yeah, this is a kind of a, not a mobile home court exactly as far as year-round places, but they come and go, and then this is a home here, home here, home here, and this is commercial. Is that right? I think.
Yes.
And then there's 2 homes, I think, on this parcel. A home here, and this is the golf course area.
So we could either spot zone it or grant a conditional use. Like, this is for conditional use.
Or
right?
conditional use with conditions, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Under the infrastructure requirements, the sewer and water, trail, curb and gutter, it says none. What does that mean?
Yeah, without the zoning on it.
Yeah.
Because this is typically a highway here, and you have your ditch line and everything else, there really is no place. And maybe Shane, I don't know, could speak to it better than I could, but
It's a rural road standard. It's built to a rural road. Doesn't have sidewalk, curb, gutter.
Does it, city sewer?
There is city sewer and water.
Are they hooked up to it?
Yes.
Okay.
I asked another question. But
Go ahead.
Not for her.
Oh, all right. Any other questions for Joe? With that, I'll open the public hearing. If anybody's here to speak for or against this conditional use, please come forward and state your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Lindgren. I'm an attorney with the Green Roby Oviatt Law Firm. Beverly and Steve called me earlier this week and told me that they were not going to be able to attend the meeting and asked if I would appear on their behalf, and so I'm doing that. I've had a chance to review the documentation that's been provided to you, and I, unless there are specific questions, I don't intend to reread that to you, but again, I've listened to the dialogue, and what's happened is the buyer who's purchasing the home has run into a problem with financing where lender won't provide the financing with the current zoning situation being C3 and the inability to rebuild if there was a casualty. And my primary purpose was Steve and Beverly just wanted representation here to let you know that they aren't disregarding this hearing. They just couldn't be here, so they wanted someone to speak on their behalf.
Okay.
And it's your understanding that in 1990, 92, and 1998, the city of Watertown had previously issued building permits to this property?
That's what was described to me, and again, as they indicated in their letter, and obviously ignorance is no excuse, but it was never pointed out to them that they were even in a commercial zone when they learned this. It was news to them. So,
And the issuance of those building permits gave them some sort of indication that they thought that they had some sort of vested right to have a residential structure on that property?
yes.
So have they owned this house since '68?
The letter indicates they've owned it for 31 years.
Okay.
I read that what was submitted, and they said they've lived there for 31 years and made significant improvements. And basically, unless they could find a cash buyer where lender requirements weren't involved, they wouldn't be able to sell the property.
I understand.
They're asking for a conditional use, not a rezoning. Will the lender accept a conditional use and grant the loan then? They
That's-
don't need a rezoning?
That's my understanding. It's not a zoning issue. The lender is concerned that if the house burned to the ground, their collateral would be gone and they wouldn't be able to rebuild.
Yes. We've dealt with this before, and usually conditional uses or variances to allow them to rebuild in case it's damaged is sufficient for the banks.
I don't have any more questions for the representative, but I do have one for Luke Muller.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Luke, you've been working with the city on developing a comprehensive land use plan updates. Has the update to the comprehensive land use plan addressing any redevelopment of this area in your discussions?
Yeah, within this area, it would be identified as mixed commercial and residential in that area. So go figure, it matches.
So based on your professional background, rezoning to residential at some point in time would not be out of line with what the land use plan is proposing moving forward.
Correct. I'd probably expect a higher density residential, but yeah, residential in that area wouldn't be out of the line of questioning some sort of mixed use or else higher density residential working its way back to the river.
Thank you.
Does anybody else here speak for or against? Any other questions?
How does the conditional use function? Is it perpetual? Does it travel with the property then?
It would be perpetual for this property, right?
So basically you're de facto zoning by issuing a
Yeah.
conditional use permit.
I think in most cases I would generally prefer to do a rezone, but in this particular case with the surrounding uses, I'm not sure it makes sense at this time to move forward with that. If we do the conditional use, we may do it on a caveat that at some point in time in the future, we might want to rezone.
Would the applicant be objecting to a condition to be placed on the conditional use that if at some point in time the city was to rezone that property, they and the landowner in the chain of title would not object to a rezoning?
I don't see any reason why they would object, and I don't have any instructions to
Not to.
object.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion for discussion.
I would make a motion to approve the conditional use request without attaching any of the landscape lighting standards or any of the things that were brought up in the staff review, with the only condition being that if and when the city of Watertown would choose to rezone that property to a more appropriate zone to reflect the actual use of the property, that the owners of the property at that time would not object to the rezoning. Furthermore, I would instruct staff to treat this property from a future building permit standpoint as residentially zoned.
A second.
A motion by Mr. Kays and second by Mr. Dowley. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any other business? I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mr. Dowley, second by Mr. Colleen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No? We are adjourned.
Ready when you are, John. Oh. Oh, okay. Didn't want you guys to be waiting on me. See ya.
Are you gonna start?
Yeah. So while we're waiting for, I guess we'll commence and go ahead. So this time I'd like to call to order the March 22nd, 2018 Watertown City Plan Commission. Roll call, please.
Olson. Here. Stromberger.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Culhane.
Here.
Kays.
Here.
And Stein and Hansen are absent. We have a quorum.
Okay, first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there any changes or additions, corrections?
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Kays, a second.
Second.
Ms. Olson, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Second item is the approval of minutes of the March 8th, 2018 meeting. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
Ms. Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Culhane, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Third item on the agenda is resolution number 2018-08. Randy?
Okay, so the subject with this is a proposed resolution 2018-08 amending chapter 21-8007, section 7 of the revised ordinances of the city of Watertown, adding the allowance of temporary boulevard and public property signage adjacent to property and temporary boulevard and public property signs non-adjacent to property through the sign permit process. The background: Councilman Adam Lallam proposed a real estate sign ordinance amendment on December 6, 2018, per ordinance 1745B, looking at the betterment to the citizens of Watertown and for them to get the most amount of visibility if they were trying to sell their homes. The current proposed ordinance amendment was submitted by the Northeast Association of Realtors after their previous City Council proposal was denied at the December 6, 2017 City Council meeting, with the direction to come back with a compromise to the sign code ordinance. There are three things that the council can regulate, that being the time, manner, and placement of signs. The City Council said that they would be interested in looking at a compromise that perhaps could be tolerated by all parties, not exclusive to just real estate signs. The proposed amendment does include auction sales, home sales by owner, real estate listing sales, and real estate open houses. Staff has concerns that the proposed ordinance amendment may be too convoluting and would substantially increase staff effort for monitoring and enforcement of the sign code by the Building Services Department. Staff members concluded with a consensus that the city should regulate signs altogether from a content-neutral basis following the most recent Supreme Court decision, which is where city staff recommends the Plan Commission to not support resolution number 2018-08 as presented to City Council.
Okay, with that, I'll open the public hearing. If anybody's here to speak for and against it, and initially I have a question for Mr. Muller. Luke? Would you explain some of the ramifications of this, please?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Would you explain some of the ramifications of this as written? You have some comments you would like to make?
I put together a couple of thoughts on it, and I'll point them out, and I can stick around probably for another 20 minutes or so, but basically what we've got, as Brandy had described, Supreme Court decisions indicate that we need to regulate sign placement or signs by time, placement, and manner, how long they're there, the type of sign. and where they're located at. And so, here, I'll just do this, Brandy. I've got it here. You got it? So, basically, 2018-08, this resolution really gets us to the doorstep. I think the folks that worked on this did a great job of getting us real close to it. This is narrowly tailored towards the, though it's not narrowly tailored only to real estate signs, it is towards a, quote, commercial activity. And so there are a couple of flaws as far as from the standpoint of trying to handle the town as a whole. And my main thoughts on that are that there's a couple of things. The first thing that you need to keep in mind is you need to determine whether or not you as a board feel comfortable allowing any signs in the boulevard. And once you've gotten past that answer, then you get to the point of making sure that's content neutral. I think it's very good. It's far better than we have anywhere else in our ordinance as far as I see it. However, they're trying to meld this in with what we've got for an existing ordinance, and that's really difficult. And so I think we really need to work together with the rest of the ordinance to try and get it in there, try and make the rest of the temporary sign ordinance work together. The main concern I've got as far as a content neutral standpoint that I think is probably the most difficult is just a simple phrase on that, and it's in the very first section. It's letter A, where it talks about the section. And I'm sorry I don't have the whole section on here, but it says in 21.8007 line 2, the phrase saying notify the public of such use or purpose, and that's indicating that the sign would be intended to notify the public, which again, anytime we have to read the sign in order to determine how to regulate it, that's where we run into problems.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Before that one, it says for which a commercial use or purpose. Doesn't that indicate content? Because that it's commercial, it could be political, it could be religious, it could be general. So are you limiting this to commercial only?
Well,
and can we limit it to commercial only?
Well, that's the point, is that the speech itself can't be limited. So if it's only on lots that have a commercial use, then in theory, my understanding of it is that you'd have an opportunity if it's only on lots that have a commercial use, but you've got to limit it to that standpoint. Plus, you can't limit what they're saying on that sign. And so that's where the portion about the notification. The other part is that I also have a difficult time knowing that the Gilbert, Arizona case was a kind of a similar situation where they did allow for commercial language, but they did not allow for religious or religious sorts of signs or anything in terms of a religious organization, which is really what got them into the mess that they were in. So I guess the point is that it would probably be better to identify the times in which it is allowed, or else just to say you're allowed to have a sign.
Because the second paragraph, that purposes can include, then you're starting content.
Well, the purposes can include, I think it's probably okay because that's talking about when it's allowed. That's going to be your time. I think you can qualify it and trip it with the time standpoint.
Well, okay, this relates it to auction sales, home sales by owner, real estate listing, and open houses. Those could be content.
That could be when it happens.
Yeah, you can restrict the when to where something like that is happening on the property, but you can't restrict that they're only having a sign. Put it this way: if I'm selling my house, I could have a sign out in my front yard that says that I'm pretty awesome. That's basically what that would allow, is that it's not restricting what you can say on the sign, it's restricting when you can say it.
But if I'm not selling my house, can I put up a sign that says I'm awesome?
Nope. Not according to the way this is listed.
And
that would be okay.
how can you limit that?
Only on the basis if you're saying that the only time it's okay to have a sign is during one of these certain times. I'm not saying that it's the right way to go about it. I'm just saying that those are ways you can restrict it based on what is happening on the property at the time. Again, it's a time frame. I go back to if we had a draft as we worked on a sign code a couple of years ago, in which within that draft what we had in there was a discussion about for temporary signs that we would point out, and I gave this in the presentation to the council, was that instead of going with, I'm going to go with campaign signs instead, instead of listing an exemption for campaign signs, you would have the ability to put up blank signs on your property this many days before an election and this many days after an election. So the point is that you wind up having the signs you can have on there, and it's triggered by a certain time. It's not restricting what winds up being on it. At that time, you can have an advertisement for such and such real estate on that. It just says that's the time that you're allowed to have a sign, the time of year. And so what they've got in here is a trigger mechanism that I think you could probably still use. I'm more concerned about the sentence above it than I am about the time frame, about the trigger mechanisms they've got in there.
So if a person was selling their house, could someone else come along and put up a religious or a political sign for that same time period?
I think it would be difficult to say that they couldn't.
So
Because you'd be regulating their speech if you did tell them they couldn't. And that's where the sentence that says notifying the public of such use or purpose that I think is probably problematic. The most problematic part.
So you're saying that the first thing we need to do as a board would be to determine whether or not signs should be allowed in the boulevard, or recommend that signs be allowed in the boulevard.
Yeah, I think.
And if the answer to that question is yes, then it needs to be a deeper dive into what's in here and maybe coming up with something else.
Yeah, I think the first hurdle is to make sure that that's something that is okay under certain situations. It may be, it may not be. That's really not. It's not for me to decide. But once you get to that point, I think what you've got here is a really good framework, and I think that it can get us real close. I've got some concerns about the administration of it, but I really think that they like I said, I think they've gotten you to the doorstep on it if we do that.
It seems how you brought up administration of it. If you say you can put a sign up for 120 days, who's going to be the cop and who's going to pay the person to go out there and say this sign's been up for, 121 days, so now it's got to come down? And how do we regulate Ken's time? And who pays for Ken's time to regulate signs?
That's a difficulty, and I think at this point, if you were, I think you're going to want to dive into that more specifically if you're going to dive into the ordinance itself. I think that is a difficulty, trying to follow with the amount of time, trying to track the amount of time that they're out there. In my own opinion, I think that it probably goes along the lines of perhaps a license process instead, where you wind up having the ability to have anybody that is going to put up temporary signs comes in, gets a license, and then in the end, if they're not following the rules that the city has, they risk losing that license and not being able to put them up anymore.
So we've already discussed this topic at one point in time, and we recommended to the council that no signs in the boulevard, and this is their second chance at trying to get it through, basically.
Yeah, and you are going to, I will point out, you are going to have pressure again with other sorts of signs as well. And that's, I guess, where, in the end, my recommendation to you is that from the standpoint of my office, I need to recommend that if you're going to handle any signs in the boulevard, talk about all the signs that you're going to allow on the boulevard. I understand that the group's put this together and done a lot of work on this as far as how to handle it. I think from my standpoint, though, I've got to recommend that if you're going to address some signs in the right-of-way, you handle all signs in the right-of-way.
Because if we allow one, we're going to have to allow them all at some point in time.
You're going to have to answer to those folks that want to, yes, especially if it's tailored, if you're excluding something.
Okay. Any other questions for Luke? You have any other comments?
What kind of a time frame do you think it would take for the planning commission, a group, or whatever to sit down? and work our way through this. My initial perspective is just when it comes to the policy as it was presented, and I'll be very adamant about it. I think the policy was being developed in a vacuum, and it came to the Planning Commission a couple days before a public hearing. My recommendation going forward to staff and anyone else would be that if we're talking about a policy, that once you develop what you think you want it to look like, we don't go to a public hearing automatically. I think it needs to come to a work session of the Planning Commission so that we can vet the issues that we may or may not have with it. Because in the event that this doesn't go forward tonight and it becomes a no vote, and it goes to the City Council for action on it, they're going to need a supermajority, or they might turn around and say, well, send it back to us again. I'd rather try to get this thing right the first time as opposed to what might appear to be a third time's a charm.
I guess my thoughts on it are that I think that you could, if we were starting this from scratch, we'd probably be talking about a handful of months. I think that with the work that's gone on with this, I really think that you could probably, within a meeting, most two probably have at least you could have information as far as in the boulevard figured out, if not your entire temporary signs caught up at that period of time. And if not, then you'd come back and act on this if you weren't ready within a month and do that.
And Luke, would you recommend kind of taking a look more at the whole temporary sign ordinances versus just bolting?
Absolutely. Probably the concern I didn't point out, well, I already said that, is that you've got within your ordinance it's not content neutral, and I know I've spoken with Mr. Lallam as well about that. That was one of the troubles that they had as well trying to work with it, is how do we make this content neutral when we're carved out specifically within the temporary sign section. So that it's going to take a little bit of work, and if we get bogged down on that, well, then let's focus on this part if we need to. It's really up to you as to how you want to drive that car.
So I guess we have to decide, like you said, one, do we want signs on the boulevard? And if we do, then we have to delve deeper into this.
I'll sit back if you've got any questions.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here to speak for or against? Please state your name.
I'm Kyle Lallam, and I'm here on behalf of the Northeast South Dakota Association of Realtors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening and answer any questions you may have. While presenting this evening, I will reference statistics and reference it from a real estate point of view, but know that this proposal that sits before you is not a real estate sign ordinance, but driven as a content neutral piece, and also to show the necessity as to why this request is being made, not only on behalf of the realtors, but on behalf of the community as well. First, let's take a look at a few of the driving factors regarding the renewed interest in the enforcement of temporary signs within the public right-of-way. First, we had a 1-in-100-year event that caused hail damage to thousands of homes. Roofing companies riddled the boulevards with their plastic flimsy signs all over the place, which the council had made mention of. And while this event did cause a large boom in temporary signage, it also had a huge economic impact on the community itself and sales tax receipts as well as the BBB tax. Secondly, H2020, the survey that was done indicated that the need for new signage ordinances to be addressed. However, in regards to that was mostly driven on the gateway or the Highway 212 piece. During the previous administration, I'd made that recommendation since the DOT is going to be having a 212 reconstruction piece come up, because I served on both the planning and the implementation committees for H2020. So that was one of the things that we had taken in an effort to push forward a new sign code ordinance as far as 212 is concerned. And finally, the current administration has indicated that their commitment is to protect or to enforce the ordinance as written, which is exactly, we're in full support of that. And that's why we're presenting this today. Here's a little backstory on the proposal. I know Luke talked about it, but for years the signage, the real estate signage or temporary signage in the public right-of-way was not allowed per ordinance, but was never enforced. The local realtor association has been around for over 40 years, and we've used that public right-of-way or those boulevards as a way of doing our business. I will show you instances today that without this amendment, the sign ordinance allowing signs in the public right-of-way, some homeowners would be at a disadvantage. The council voted down our proposed amendment presented in December of 2017, not because they didn't want signage in the public right-of-way per se, but simply because the proposed amendment was in violation of the 2015 Supreme Court case, which Luke just mentioned, which was the Reed versus the Town of Gilbert, because the signs and the ordinance itself was not based on content neutrality. In December, that proposed amendment was not written as content neutral. So after they voted that down, they asked us to come back with something that would be deemed as content neutral. And at that time, former city attorney Vince Foley, because he was one day away from leaving his post and having Mr. Roby take the helm, offers his assistance in helping us write this sign code ordinance that would follow the recommendation of the council for that content neutrality. The proposal in front of you today is just that. It was written in an effort to come into compliance with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling for Reed versus the Town of Gilbert. The proposed ordinance that sits in front of you regulates time, manner, and placement all through a permitted use through the city. So that's an important piece on this, is it is a permitted use through City Hall. It will not allow for creepage or obstruction of Clearview Triangle because the permit, in that permit process that's written in front of you, the applicant will have to fill out a site plan regarding the placement of said temporary sign. The material of the sign is also identified in this ordinance, so that it has to be constructed of a material that also would be addressed in that proposed ordinance. The real estate business is not a one-size-fits-all, and each community has its own unique advantages and challenges, and each community's consumers act and react differently. According to statistics published by the National Association of Realtors, or NAR, nationwide home buyers state that the yard sign account for 8% of the initial discovery point for searching for homes. However, locally, that statistical number is 2 to 3 times higher, or upwards of 24%. I can tell you the number of times I've answered the phone, hey, I saw a sign at 1700 13th Avenue. What's the price? That's their initial point of discovery. Another statistic that's published by NAR states that only 1% of consumers find their homes via print ad. However, locally, the public opinion will tell you that their second highest distribution day is the Wednesday paper, because that's the day that the real estate locator guide comes out. And this is how our local consumers search for properties, local. So I printed out some slides, and I'm sorry some of them are pixelated, but I took these off the First District website. So in reference to the necessity for allowing signage in the public right-of-way, this is South Lake Drive right here. So you can see here is the lot line, and it'll be the same. It's okay. And here's the lot line here. Here's the structure itself. There is sorry, let me go the other way here. I apologize. There's not too many of these. It just so here's a top piece. This identifies or justifies the rationale behind a temporary sign for directional signage, and that's the second piece of that amendment that's in front of you. It's written as a 24-hour in advance or 48 hours in advance, and must be taken down within 2 hours. So if you have a property that is, say we're going to do an open house, or somebody's going to have a LuLaRoe party, or somebody's going to have a Tupperware sale or something like that, and they had a metal sign that was fabricated as a directional signage, took the permitted use and said, I want to put it out here. Right now, without that caveat, without this exemption, we would be required to ask this homeowner or this homeowner to place a sign on their private property as a directional piece, so that we could get them to say a property down here on Cherry Drive or 22nd Street. Here is a picture of, from the GIS. This shows the lot line here. This is 10th Avenue. So it's 115 10th Avenue. Here is the lot line. Here is the boulevard, the sidewalk. And, oops, excuse me. Here's the overview from Google Maps. Same thing. Here's the sidewalk. But there's a fence that goes across this property. And per the rule, that sign for sale would have to be back here without access to public right away. Same thing on the property right next door. There's two of those. And that's why in crafting this ordinance based on content neutrality, we didn't also just want to limit it to Lake Kempesca, because there are pieces or parts of the community that, based on the setback requirements or the public right of way, it would greatly hinder their ability to do that. Here's one out on North Lake Drive. You can see the lot line here. The garage and the house both stick out past where that is. So the only place to advertise their property for sale is within that public right of way. And there's the Google Maps overlay of the same property. So I did the measurements here, and that's why when we met with the council said, well, should we do 10 feet back? Should we do 15 feet back? I couldn't answer that question because there is no unilateral answer for that. So on the measurement here, estimated from the back of the curb to that property lot line, this is 26.2 feet. So that's why we did not put a number of feet minimum in the ordinance as proposed in front of you today. Here's another one that's 20 feet, 0.4 inches. That's on 2nd Avenue Southeast. So here's another list of properties down on South Lake Drive with public right-of-way that's there. Here's another one within the city limits, 25.6 feet. So here's another example of a property. Now we're talking about discovery points for people from outside the community. If you said that somebody searched online and wanted to look for a Hillcrest property, Hillcrest Drive or Jonathan Drive, if they didn't know the community, they most likely would not be able to find that. Same thing with Palisades. I mean, if you're doing a property on Palisades, open house or anything, you'd have to put it out here, the signage out here, to get direction into that. And I think there's one. Yeah, how many know where Dart Drive is? Yeah, I've lived here almost my entire life, and Dart Drive is a perfect example of a property that without this exemption, people from even in town may have a difficult time finding this. But the thing that I found unique about this is look at how the property line is on this deal here. If we're strictly using the GIS, this property right here goes all the way up to the curb. This property on this side goes a drastic number of feet back. And that's the reason that we wrote that the way that we did. Watertown currently has 135 active residential listings listed for sale within the city limits of Watertown. And on average, there's between 8 and 30 open houses on any given week or weekend. Typically, they start Thursdays because the real estate locator guide comes out on Wednesdays. How can realtors market an open house without directional signage that is not placed on private property? We can't do that. It would be necessary to place directional signage on private property, and this is addressed in that proposal in the permitted use as well. We talked about the South Lake Drive from Cattail Crossing, much of North Lake Drive along Highway 20. All of those properties could be adversely affected or hindered in their ability to market their property for sale without that first point of contact. In business, you strive to find the most effective and efficient way to do your business and accomplish your goal. Our goal as realtors is to sell our clients' properties as quickly as possible. Personal motivation to sell is different for everyone, and some motivating factors include but are not limited to job transfer, divorce, death, or more traditionally, the step-up buyer. But regardless, when someone hires a realtor, ultimately, they want their property sold. The issues before us today is not about realtors having to work harder. It's about utilizing best practices in an effort to meet the goals established by our buyers and sellers. And will homes still sell? Absolutely. Will buyers still be able to find properties? Yes, they will, but how easily? Especially considering the statistical data for that first point of entry. In some areas, 15 to 20 feet will obviously adversely affect and impact the ability for a prospective buyer to find that first point of contact. And it would become a hardship on sellers in certain areas of town, like I've indicated, as well as Lake Kempesca. Real estate is oftentimes an individual's greatest opportunity to create and build wealth. Homeowners Home ownership is directly tied to safer neighborhoods and it impacts a sense of pride for community. There's also a sense of ownership rights to the sidewalks and boulevards. I mean, homeowners typically don't understand that they don't own the sidewalk to the curb or the public right-of-way. The city doesn't mow the grass, the homeowner does. The city doesn't plow the snow, the homeowners take care of the snow. I mean, that's not your issue, but that is just one of the things that when we're talking about public right-of-way, there is a certain sense of ownership to that because they do have to maintain that. As you've seen through the slides I've shared, some property lines don't encompass sidewalks and other ones do. So that's another challenge and why we proposed this amendment to the sign ordinance the way that it's written today without a specific number of feet back from curb or roadway. Please bear in mind that when you're deciding, do you want signage in the public right-of-way, excuse me, some of the areas identified in the photos will have no option but to utilize that public right-of-way without them being at a disadvantage. So imagine in your business if you were forced to change your business model that your customers have become accustomed to or conditioned to. How much hardship would you endure? This isn't, again, a realtor hardship. It's a hardship on residents, a hardship on Watertown homeowners, and a hardship on clients. That is why we're asking for your support. That's why we've crafted the amendment to serve as a content-neutral ordinance that is allowed and enforceable not only through application but permitted use so long as it meets the requirements that are set forth in this proposal. The city staff had researched 11 other communities within the state of South Dakota that have ordinances prohibiting signage in the public right-of-way. I have talked to 10 of those 11 communities, and I addressed that in the city council meeting in December. But the staff also indicated that the amendment convolutes the existing sign ordinance, and since it is not written, the existing sign ordinance is not written as content neutral. My response to that statement is now we have a baseline for change. The mayor has repeatedly commented on how we need to grow and change with society, and we should only have rules that are appropriate for our community. And this amendment is appropriate for our community. It's content neutral. Per the December 17th request from City Council, I sincerely appreciate your time and consideration on this matter. I thank you for your support, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Kyle.
You're welcome.
Any questions for Kyle?
Interim city attorney Vince Foley drafted this as a city attorney or as
after he was done.
And who else was involved? I mean, how did we come up with this?
This was done at the direction of City Council. They asked us to come back with a content neutral piece, so it was Councilman Adam Lallam, myself, Vince Foley, and the Northeast Area Association of Realtors. We had crafted this initial piece in, I think, the mid to end of December. And I had given it to our board of realtors for approval at that time, and then I requested a meeting with city staff so that we could present it to them, so that they could go through it and review it and let us know if they had any questions or changes or recommendations. Because again, this ordinance as written was voted on by our board as something that we could support, and that they offered me the opportunity to come and speak on its behalf.
In regards to sub-point D, the temporary boulevard and public property signage not adjacent to property, does this essentially allow people to, are we allowing people to put signs in other people's boulevards? I mean, is that what we're doing?
It isn't other people's boulevards, it's the public right of way. So that's the reason that we did that.
In front of other people's houses though?
Correct.
Without any consent of any abutting, either the person's house.
If you look at the way that it is written on the upper piece up there, it says that they want the adjoining landowner's permission to do it, so long as it it's only required to have the abutting landowner's permission, so long as it's outside that 10-foot side yard setback. So if you got a 50-foot lot and you put it in the middle of that 50-foot lot, you don't have to talk to the neighbor on the left and the right because it's outside that 10-foot buffer.
Nor do you have to talk to the neighbor who's in front of their house.
Correct.
Just want to make sure that's clear.
So you're saying you would be required to talk to the person that you put the temporary directional sign in front of his house or not?
The way that my understanding of this is we would not if it's outside the 10-foot buffer zone because it's in the public right of way.
So you wouldn't have to discuss with them at all. You could just, if we give you the permit, you can go stick it out there in the boulevard.
Because it's public right away.
Yes.
Yeah, which is the way that we've done it for 40 plus years.
Because if they were talking to the property owner, then they could just ask to put it on their private property at that point.
But Kyle, with those directional signs, there is a limit on the time that you would leave it out there,
yes,
right?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Olson. It is stipulated in there that the, so you're talking about D, temporary boulevard and public property signage non-adjacent to property. The permit may be granted for a temporary sign placement not abutting or not adjacent to property, but it also goes back into the first piece that's in there. But it also says that said permit shall be valid for 24 hours in advance of the event and 2 hours at the end of the event, which again is addressed in that permit piece.
So then again, for every 65 garage sales that are going on every weekend throughout the course of the summer, they will have to come and get a permit from the staff to locate it in the public boulevard as long as it's situated in the middle of.
And it has to be compliant with the material that is listed on this?
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying, but that's,
But yeah.
theoretically, that's what we're saying, that every garage sale, every graduation, when we're placing them in the public right away, staff is going to have to process a piece of paper.
Right, and and a part of that is in trying to maintain that content neutrality. And let me back up. A lot of this was done not only with our existing sign ordinance, but we also pulled sign ordinances from other communities, not relegated just to South Dakota, that were in that content neutral space. So if you look at 3-A, it says no sign, including the support structure, shall be constructed of any materials which is non-metallic, metal, or polymetal, so as to withstand impacts, winds, or blowing snow. I mean, that's
so
addressed.
everybody that's running for re-election this year is going to have a metal sign if they place it in the public right away.
Mm-hmm.
For this ordinance.
I'm just
Correct, yeah.
clarifying.
The way that I'm understanding this, though, it has to be strictly commercial use, for which a commercial use or purpose desires a sign
Well, I
placement.
think that's problematic in the beginning. I mean, I'm just trying to apply that. I'm trying to say if the issue in the first paragraph that talks about notifying the public of such use or purpose is problematic and that's removed, then we still have, that preamble is removed and you still have what I'm calling a functional administrative process. Then the question regarding political signs, garage sales, graduation signs, all those things would have to run through that process. And I think Mr. Mueller was correct that I think they're very close to having something that's basically content neutral. It gets back to the question of, one, do we want to allow signs in the boulevard? And if what Mr. Lallam is saying is that the city council is not as objective to that, but wanting something that's content neutral, they're close. But I think the bigger question that comes back to me is that we also have existing political and real estate signs are listed as exempted signs in the current non-content neutral temporary. And if I'm going to be making a change, I would like to fix that section as well. If we are, for all practical purposes, this is a real estate sign issue that's causing what's going on here. So if I'm thinking, I would just as soon fix that whole section together, and if we can do it in a meeting or two, I think it would behoove us moving forward. I know you're not looking for a motion yet, but I'm letting you know that regardless of whatever motion is going to be made, I'm going to make a substitute motion to postpone the decision on this tonight.
Well,
and then we can debate that.
And that was we weren't tasked with rewriting the city sign ordinance code.
No, I know.
Which is something that's
I did it
for
once already. It's
a
not a lot of
decade
fun.
plus. So, our task was to come up with an amendment for the public right-of-way use.
I think you're close. I think you're really close.
And if this is the baseline to help usher in a new sign code ordinance that works and addresses all of those, political signs and everything else.
And Mr. Lallam, I think you're really close, and I'm just going to reiterate what I said previously, that I think when a piece of public policy comes to the Planning Commission, I need a little bit more than 2.5 days to digest what the implications of that policy is and what the ramification of that policy. I think it's a lot bigger than a page and a half of some regulatory regulations that's going to say, well, this is going to fix it. And I think realistically, under statute, the Planning Commission is charged with developing that policy and making the recommendation to the City Council. And because of that, I think we're close. I think it's a discussion that can be held amongst the Planning Commission in an open setting where we invite you and your group to come in. We might want to talk about some politicians that might want to come in. We might want to talk to other groups that have temporary signs, even the individuals that lease temporary signs. And I think if we can come up with something that is basically content neutral, and then we have the question then, well, is it content neutral for the boulevard? And if it's content neutral for the individual private property, maybe we keep one, maybe we keep both, maybe they both get thrown out. And then from that perspective, if we can't come to some sort of resolution on the issue, I'm not exactly sure how the City Council does. So I'm just going to let you
Any
know.
other questions for Mr. Wallen?
I'm fine.
Anybody else that wants to speak for or against the issue?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'm Diana Ford. The basic question of, I think, should we have boulevard signs or not, is the first thing to address. I personally think it looks much better without boulevard signs all over the entire city. And as far as what has this done to affect real estate sales, I heard information on percentages of people here who do look for homes by the newspaper or by the signage or whatever. But I would be interested in knowing, has there been a significant reduction in home sales since those signs were moved off the public right-of-way compared to the same time period when the signs were allowed in the public right-of-way? If there hasn't been a significant reduction in sales, why would you move them back to the public right-of-way? So I mean, the argument is it's more difficult to sell houses. So tell me those figures. Is it more difficult to sell houses without real estate signs in the public right-of-way?
Interesting question. And I don't know where you would go for the answer to that.
Well, I think you would go to the same place that provided the percentages of the people who use the newspaper or listen to radio ads or look at a sign on the road. I mean, someone is gathering this data, so I would think someone has data on sales over certain time periods before the signs were moved off the public right-of-way as compared to a similar time period when the signs were in the public right-of-way.
And I think that's a good question to ask. However, I think it's much bigger than real estate signs. And as Mr. Lallam said, in about 6 weeks, we're going to start seeing a lot of political signs being put up. Right. And in about another 6 to 7 weeks, we'll be seeing garage sale signs all over the place. And they're all will be in the public right away. So I think the bigger question is we need to figure out how do we address the whole issue of signs in the public right away.
FYI, I've probably had 3 calls already for political signage, and every one of them is notified they're not allowed in the public right away anymore. So.
You and I both know that they're notified.
Can I finish my public statement first before you
go
guys
ahead.
go back and forth? Thank you. It's true, it is a total sign ordinance, but I think we just kind of all acknowledge that the basic part of it is the real estate sign part. I mean, that's the overwhelming driving force to this. Mm-hmm. And nothing is going to be settled, I don't think, until you figure out, do the realtors really need signs in the public right of way? That's the bottom line, in my mind. Right now, the signs aren't in the public right of way. Everyone knows the rule. Simple is always better. The simpler it is, the better it is to understand, and the better it is to enforce. So my personal opinion is, unless someone can demonstrate to me that there's been a significant decrease in real estate sales with that change, then don't put them in the public right of way. Thank you.
I think we need to be really careful lump summing. Am I okay?
Go ahead. Yeah, go
Lump summing everything and putting this back on the realtors. Ultimately, the people that these realtors represent are our friends and our neighbors and the folks that we go to church with, and they're trying to do their best work and what they're hired to do. So I think it's unfair to just categorize it. And I think you're right, though. You know, it's a bigger thing than just the realtors. I think we need to be very careful about painting that with a broad brush.
And I don't think we can legislate or make policy decisions based on content. I mean, that's the whole bottom line of everything we've been hearing this entire time, is that we can't, it isn't based on content.
Right.
I agree with that, and that's one of my concerns, and we talked a little bit about it earlier in regards to some of the language here around, auction sales, home sales, and the argument can be made that those are in relation to a time, right?
Well, if we can't.
But is that also in a way de facto regulating the content if your time fences are based on that type of economic transaction?
The short answer is yeah. I think we can do that based upon my research, and you can set up because again, you're not regulating what the sign says. The ordinance isn't saying you have to read the sign and know what the regulation is. The ordinance is setting up a fashion that during certain times of the year, certain events that are going on, that you bet your time, and then if the placement and the manner is the type of the sign, how long it's going to be there, and if that's what we're regulating. But when we say I can have a political sign, or I can have a church sign, or a real estate sign, and I'm being specific to that, that's where I think it's problematic. And so I think realistically, the five of us are having a hard time wrapping our heads around this. I know that they've done a lot of work. I think personally we don't drop the ball here, and I think if we give ourselves say that we will get together sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks to talk about this, come up with a recommendation, and at that time have the conversation of whether or not it's in or out in the boulevard, and then if it is in or out, where do we go from there? I think we owe that to ourselves to have that conversation in an open, frank manner, and then come back with a recommendation that can go to the city council for their disposition.
Okay. First off, anybody else want to speak in the public hearing? In that case, I'll close the public hearing, and I'm not going to ask for a motion. I'm going to ask for a discussion. We have 2 questions. A, do we want signs in the boulevard? Yes or no? If no, then this pretty much goes away. If yes, we want signs in the boulevard, then we have to address this, and if you want to delay that and address it at some later point in time, that's fine. But I think the first question we have to decide on are, A, do we want to have signs in the boulevard or not? Because if we have signs, we're going to have all types of signs, not just commercial, not just real estate or whatever. So what is the feeling of the commission?
Two points. One, we don't have a full board here, so I think being 5 out of the 7, it could very well go a wide different ways. Second point is that, by and large, personally, I'm not in favor of signs in the boulevard. However, there may be circumstances when it would be appropriate, and if there was a way to flush that discussion out to say when would it be appropriate, if we can't come up with a time then it would be appropriate, then the answer would be no. But I think, again, that's really somebody would, to come in and give us some ideas of when it would be appropriate, under what circumstances, there may be a time that all of us would agree that at some point in time it may be appropriate to have a single sign in the boulevard. Maybe not. And so I guess if I would say that I would like to say yes, just to continue the conversation.
Okay. Currently, the ordinance says no signs in the boulevard, and I haven't seen any verbiage that would change my mind. I'm still no signs in the boulevard at all, but if you want to continue this session at some later date and kick the can down the road for a while, that's fine if you want to wait for more people on the board. But do you have any other comments?
My only comment being that I'd like to continue the discussion. I mean, I don't a whole hog disagree with allowing them to exist in the public boulevard. The reality is that the folks in the community want them in the public boulevard because they put them in the public boulevard. We see all sorts of different signs and so we should either try to figure out some sort of comprehensive solution, or I mean that's what we should do.
Or enforce it and say you can put them in a yard, but you can't put them on the boulevard.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not inherently against having additional discussion on this, but it definitely has to be universal across the board, whatever we decide to do or whatever we decide that we need to enforce.
At this point, I'm not opposed to having them in the boulevard, like Liam said, with the public already using that, and if there isn't a clear enforcement at this point, I think we need to continue the conversation.
Well, then the appropriate motion would be not to approve, but would be to postpone action on this matter to a prescribed date, because we can't do it indefinitely under Roberts. So I would make a motion to revisit Resolution 2018-08, not at the next meeting, but the following meeting, and that in the interim time we would have a planning commission meeting where we will set aside a half an hour to argue it out.
Discussion meeting?
Discussion meeting on whether or not the boulevards, and then if it's not the boulevards and that goes away, we still need to address the issue of temporary signs and coming up with some way to address temporary signs long range. That's my motion.
Would you add to that too, that maybe we invite those other parties that are involved to that time?
It would not solely be the planning commission, but I would recommend the planning commission, 3 city council members, representatives from the Realtors Association. What else would we want at that?
I'm not sure if there's maybe potential elected candidates or current candidates. I don't know.
Or general public too.
The public would be invited, but I would like to have at least some of those people here so that we can. Mr. Lallam is saying that the council wasn't necessarily against the boulevard. I don't know that to be true or not. But if there are several council members that want to show up and give us some direction, that helps us out as well, because I don't want to be the dog chasing its tail on this thing.
Just for clarification on your motion, that would be April 19 meeting, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
April 19th, we would dispense with Resolution 2018-08, either coming back with alternate language, substitute language, which would then, or we would make a motion to approve and see what happens.
So you said not at the next meeting. You wanted to have a half-hour discussion at the next meeting, and the subsequent meeting you would.
So
a month from this time, we would take action on this in 1 month. Because under Roberts, we either have to take action at the next meeting or we have to prescribe a specific date. And so.
And was it your intention to have the temporary sign code decided with that month? In that month?
I'm saying we need to have a meeting. We can talk about what we think is the appropriate action at somewhere in the interim between now and 2 meetings hence. And from there, we decide whether we're going to take action on this in its entirety, or maybe we come up with some substitute language, and then then we have a vote at that point in time.
So
I think as presented, I would vote no today. I will tell you, I'd vote no today, and I don't think that gets us any further down the road.
Okay. Do you have a question, Brandon?
So in the meantime, then, we will work to coordinate with you guys to put together a special plan commission meeting, where then we'll discuss this and we'll invite all the parties that you've mentioned. And then hopefully you guys have direction then to bring it back up at the April 19th plan commission meeting. That will put it back on the agenda.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Kays. Do I have a second to that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Dalloway to postpone the 2018-08. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is postponed. Item number 4, discussion on potential ordinance amendment adding zoning district R1A.
Okay. So this is just a discussion item where we won't be asking for action. The discussion of this topic comes from, and the topic is a potential ordinance amendment adding a zoning district, which would tentatively be R1A, to facilitate affordable housing. And this topic comes from the Mayor's Affordable Housing Committee and the desire to create a zoning district that allows for smaller minimum lot sizes and setbacks to facilitate a more affordable housing market within Watertown. Initial discussion of such a zoning designation included these requirements. The minimum lot area to be 5,000 square feet, which currently our R1 single-family residential district requires 9,000. So it'd be significantly less. And then the minimum lot width would be 50 foot, which currently it's 75. The minimum side yard setback would be 6 feet, and then currently it's 9 feet in the R1 zone. Only allowing a certain percentage of lot coverage to be impervious surfaces, only allowing driveways to be a certain width where it meets the public right-of-way to allow for on-street parking with such narrow lot widths, and open to allowing shared walls between shared lot lines as long as each home had sufficient lot width. So this is just starting the discussion with you guys to see, or to get your thoughts, and just to try to create more affordable housing by having smaller lot sizes and widths and requirements.
Okay, my first question is, what does boathouses have to do with that, or are you just recycling paper and that just happened to be in the back of it? So I have your issues here, and on the back there's a...
I don't know.
Okay, so that's extraneous.
We're not talking about
Okay,
boathouses.
No.
all right.
I was kind of disappointed now.
Didn't catch the relationship, I just wondered.
Sorry about that, for the confusion.
Earlier, the city tried to have a smaller lot area. I think it was in the Anza edition or whatever the edition they call it, up north of 14th and east of 81. Smaller lots to build more affordable housing and a little narrower streets, and that was a good idea, but it didn't really pan out. The houses up there are basically the same price as all the other houses in town. Making a smaller lot to have a affordable housing is a good idea, but I think if we're going to do this, we have to regulate it so tightly that you have to build a cheaper house on that lot, whether that's limiting the square footage of the house or whatever we do, because if we just do it this way, they're going to put a 3,500 square foot house on a 1,000 square foot lot.
And I think that's where the percentage of lot coverage comes into it, where that would be regulated, so they could only, if 60% of their lot had to be grass or pervious surface, then they would be limited on what they could build.
My recommendation is to separate that out from from impervious surfaces being one standard, but also a maximum size of these structures. So if you're saying that 60% of it has to be not impervious, whatever that number is, because when you talk about lot coverage, we look at lot coverage kind of goofy here in Watertown by the way your ordinance is set up. Lot coverage is basically supposed to be structural coverage. we use lot coverage to take into account impervious for the purposes of trying to calculate an engineering slide rule for drainage. So if you're going to talk about a 5,000 foot lot, I would like to see a 5,000 foot lot that says this is the maximum amount of structural that you can have on it, and then combine that as a part of the total impervious. I also agree with Chairman Stonebarger that I think it has to be written in there that there are no variances. We won't approve any plats that would have to need a variance at some point in time. It is what it is. And I think that would be something. I think we need to do something, and in the end, you can plat all the 5,000 foot lots you want, but if the market isn't taking it, it's going to be what it is. But I think it's a tool that we don't have in the tool bag.
Well, okay. I'll throw this out there. I was talking with the mayor yesterday. We have an R2A, single-family housing unit that has a 6,000 square foot lot, and they're 50 foot wide and yada yada. Same basically thing. Only it's 1,000 square foot larger, and there's nothing wrong with putting a single-family house in an R2A district. So if we've already got that, what do we need an entirely new zoning district for? And Mayor, do you have a comment on that?
I would love to comment on that. I did think about just right now, the R2A zone has a caveat that says no new R2A zones. So why wouldn't we just take that away and allow more? What I envision for this is that you have a maximum coverage of lot, which will control the size of the building, and the R2A does not have that currently. So if I use the R2A zone and put that requirement in, I'm creating hundreds of homes which will now be non-conforming. And I don't want to do that. Right now in R2A, you're not restricted.
Yeah,
you can pack a pretty big house on a small lot in the R2A. And the whole intention of this is to limit the size of the homes on the lot. So that's why, and Brandy didn't write a number in there. I think she has a question mark about the lot coverage, that's debatable. And however you want to say that, my point is that you have both small homes and not a lot of concrete there. And Brandy didn't mention this, but it is in the packet that the driveway width is also limited, because these narrow lots, if you have a 36 foot wide driveway on a 50 foot lot, where do you park to visit? You can't park on the street because it's all driveway, and not for this zone. This zone should have narrow driveways, small homes, and yards with grass in them, not concrete. So we can do all that with specifications. And Brandy and I talked about getting some illustrations of what 60% lot coverage would look like, or 40%. So you have a feel for that. And I wanted to put this on the agenda to start the conversation and to get your feedback on what you think would work. And we're not talking about any specific place in town right now, so we can make the zone, and if nobody wants it, they won't use it. But that tool's there if someone wants to use it. And I have talked to a few people that own land and asked them if they would even consider using it, and the answer was yes. So maybe not for a whole neighborhood, but for a block. So you have a solid block where you have these smaller homes, and then as the neighborhood grows around it, get deeper into it, the home sizes change. And you're right, John, about Northridge neighborhood. We don't want to repeat that. So we'll have to put in some stricter requirements. And that lot coverage is a new thing for a single family home. And if you're wanting to put a McMansion on a small lot, this is not the place to do it. Go find an R2A lot.
And if you come up with an R1A and I want to do a mixture of 9,000, 7,000, and 5,000, I can do that. Or
Yeah.
maybe because of the size of the lot, two 5,000s might work better than two 9,000s or whatever.
Right. And I don't know, we didn't get into spot zoning issues, if that's a concern, if you want to have at least a certain number, you don't want to have one of these lots in a string of R1 lots, or, I mean, because that can be part of the conversation too, if you think it matters. And maybe it doesn't matter, maybe you can sprinkle it around.
Would you see this being only used, I mean, I could take an R2 or I could take an R2A and I use it as an up zone to an R, because we're reducing the types of uses that you can, because R1 you can only have single family houses, or
right.
And so you can use it as an up zone, but would you include it, would you, could I take an R1, an existing R1 that's not developed, and then down zone it to an R1A?
Well, and if it met the area requirements, then you probably could. The name R1A is just random. You can call it whatever you want. Mm-hmm. I just picked that, but I don't think it's important. The idea, though, of it only being single-family lots, I'm not sure that's how it should be. It might be, and this is semantics, but if you had two homes sharing a wall on a lot line, a duplex in other words, but we call them condos because they're separately owned and separate land, would that be okay? And I think maybe that would be okay. That would not be okay in an R1 zone, so that's more of an R2 type of a use, and I'm open for discussion on that, of whether or not that's something that would be desirable, because I could see people not minding having a shared wall. It's, you know, two lots though. Yeah. That part of it I would want.
So basically it'd be a duplex on a 10,000 square foot lot rather than.
Right. Yep. And but you're selling it off with the lot line shared, and that part of it is a little tricky. I didn't think about that very much. I'd need help to make sure that we're not opening a can of worms by doing that.
But if you did that though, and you kept the lot size coverage requirements, you could actually end up with what seems to be bigger green spaces between the buildings.
Right.
So that
because that setback space is given over. So right.
I think that definitely helps to contribute to more affordable housing, as then it's just less building materials if they could share a wall and still have those
share a driveway. I see lots of advantages.
So when you were talking about narrower driveways, there's still a requirement for like a 2 cars for a single or residential house. So would it be a V driveway or something so they can still park 2 cars there, or
right? Well,
or are you gonna
the depth to the back, and I mean, you'd have to leave enough space in your design to be able to park and angle over, so a car could maneuver out of a double.
You could
garage.
use tuck unders too.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you're going to rescind that and say you could get by with just 1 car in that area, or I would be kind of wary of that. But
1 parking space on street, is that what you mean?
Well, yeah. Right now we require 2 parking spaces per single family dwelling, a minimum off street. And as long as we're going to adhere to that, that'd be fine.
Well, and no, you can't do that with a 50-foot lot. That would have to be reduced, because a typical parallel parking stall is 20 feet for parallel.
So
it's 18 for angle parking.
Yeah, the recommended is 22 feet actually.
Yeah, so you can't have 2 and a driveway, unless your driveway's super narrow.
So you're not going to require 2 parking spaces off-street parking for these buildings? This zoning, or?
Well, no, I mean,
you're only going to be able to get 1
you're only going to
on-street parking with it.
So then there's going to be more cars parked in the street in this area.
Well, they could still, just where the driveway would meet the
Well,
street is where it has to be narrow, but they could still
Oh, they can, yes, they can pave, if they have a double garage, they can pave
Right.
two
Well, that
parking
was my-
spots
okay.
on their property.
Th-
But then it has to narrow down to get into the roadway.
Yeah, okay, that was my question.
Yes.
Are you still
I
going to
did- I
require
misunderstood.
2 off-street parking? And you can have a narrow driveway a single driveway that would widen out so you can park 2 cars.
But
Or
if,
not.
if
I
you
don't-
assume a 50-foot lot, you're 22 feet to put a car in parallel parking on the street, 6-foot side yard for the driveway. It's what, 6 to 28. It still leaves you a 20 or 22 foot. I mean, you could dictate it down to a 20-foot driveway, and you could still get 2 cars in and out of there easily, side by side. And you're not going to gain more than 1 parking spot on the street
Off-street,
anyway.
2
Right.
off-street, yeah, okay.
Because
I
as
thought
soon as
you
we
were
have
talking about 2
our
on-street.
snow days and they got to plow the streets
Right.
and stuff, the cars have got to go
Yes.
someplace.
Now,
So.
okay, I didn't
Okay.
understand what you were asking me.
All right.
In a narrow lots, I want to restrict the driveway width for the on-street parking ability.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
there's only 50 feet.
I understand.
And a parking slot is 22 feet. So, where you have between driveways, depending on how they place them, you can have a few. But I don't want to restrict that any more than absolutely necessary.
Okay.
Because people have lives, and grandma has birthdays, and
Mhm.
everybody wants to come.
Yeah.
Where are they going to park? So do you have any other recommendations or suggestions to how to modify this?
Where did these, I know this is just a rough framework, but where do these numbers come from? Is this something that comes from like a more urban area, or is there a standard for sort of affordable small lot?
No, I didn't look up any standard. I know a lot of towns have a 50-foot lot width.
It's the R1 zone for Sioux Falls.
Yeah, I mean,
that's for any, that's all the high end is still 50-foot minimum lot width in Sioux
Mhm.
Falls. The market dictates a higher.
So is there going to be further discussion on this with the
Yes,
staff?
yes,
And
absolutely.
Okay.
There will be this is an ordinance change, so it will require a public hearing at the Plan Commission and then again at the council level. And we're going to draft something, but I just thought I'd.
Okay, my recommendation again to you, Madam Mayor, is that you guys draft something. Don't bring it to us at a public hearing. Bring it back to us so we can talk about it again. Then we'll go to a public hearing.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'd be
I
happy
would.
to do that.
I'd definitely be in favor of limiting the size of the building you can put on
Mhm.
the chunk of ground.
That, to me, that's key. And
Yeah.
otherwise, we get Northridge again. Which,
I
nothing
agree.
wrong with
Yeah.
Northridge. It's
No,
just
but
not
it's not affordable housing. Yeah.
Well, we don't need to be hearing variance requests either.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is good. I mean, we've been talking about this for years. I think we have a definite need
time
for
to
this. So,
move.
and I appreciate the comments on the R2A as well. I live in R2A, and a lot of that section of town is older, and we already have a non-compliant issue there, so we don't want to exacerbate
We
it.
created the R2A district just to address,
Relieve
to just basically give
Right.
us some opportunities, so we weren't constantly administrating things.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion or any other new business?
So I've been working with the Park and Rec Department, and the Park Board meets on Tuesday, March 27th, and they have us on the agenda for 6 p.m., where we'll have a joint meeting with the Plan Commission and the Park Board, where you guys
Is that
can.
here?
It will be at the Field House, March 27th, Tuesday, at 6 o'clock.
And where's the field house?
The old Armory,
Okay.
the Park and Rec
Uh-huh. All right.
building. And I'll send an email tomorrow. I was just waiting on Park and Rec's agenda, so then I can send that with it. And then there we'll discuss at-large park dedication and where both boards how they want to move forward with it, and then also specifically River Ridge and their park concepts and the land value and all the good stuff.
Okay.
And that's it. No old business either. Or I don't have anything. I don't know.
Okay. Just 1 second. We have to finish signing this before everybody takes off. No executive session? No. Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
By Mr. Dowey, a second?
Second.
Ms. Olson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.